Obviously, we're going to talk about Kevin Sullivan, who passed away a couple of days ago as we record this, and some more things about his career and our interaction with him that we didn't cover a month or so ago. And that's going to be a lot of the program. Joining me, as usual, you guys all know his allocades, but most importantly, germane to this program, he was a friend and a fan of Kevin Sullivan's. The great Brian Last, everybody.
Aloha, Jim. A pleasure to be here once again, and we'll have another good conversation about Kevin. We just talked about him, and of course we have this sad news, but there's a lot to remember and a lot to talk about.
Well, and already this happened as we said 48 hours ago, I guess, was we got the word. And even if we had been ready to sit down and record this program and it just happened, we wouldn't have talked about it because I didn't want to today. But we took a little time to think, and actually I took a little time not to think about it, because that's what I've done for the past day and a half or so, is just not think about it. And then I realized as we were about to record this, that this is another one of those shows. I love doing the show for the people, but this is another one of those that I wish that we could just not do and say we did and pick up with the drive-through and act like we did it and got it over with. But that would not be fair to people who want to hear what we have to say. Am I rambling here today on the program? The problem is that it's like, and Brian, I was telling you, and you tweeted out some pictures from the files of Kevin, including some things you didn't know you had till you went looking. And I don't tweet about people dying anymore. I haven't in quite some time, because besides the fact that it was becoming way too regular an occurrence, it seems a little frivolous for this situation. But I'm starting to think maybe we ought not talk about it either, because what the fuck? Everybody gets older. I think that's Stevie Nicks wrote that, didn't she?
Oh, I don't know the Stevie Nicks.
It's sound. You don't know the whole
catalog.
canon, yeah. But anyway, we're gonna forge ahead and do this here today, and hopefully, because you did halfway tickle me right before we started recording with, you said, "Hey, do you think that the people remember that Kevin Sullivan was partners with Whitey Caldwell?" And I said, that's the first fucking story I was going to tell, because it's still one of my favorites that Kevin ever told me. And let's get this out real quick, folks. We still don't know, exactly. I believe that the sepsis that he got from the surgery from a couple months ago, and we talked about it about a month ago on a show, and you can find it on YouTube, when we found out that he had been hospitalized and had an emergency surgery that led to complications, and that's the underlying cause of this whole thing. But with the last update that we had gotten was that he was doing physical therapy, and I know some people think, oh, he was in the gym or whatever. No, I know from my cousin, physical therapy at some level, depending on your condition, is teaching you how to swallow water again without fucking it going down in your lungs and giving you goddamn infection. So, but it was positive at last we heard, but then this was apparently the underlying cause was the infection that he'd had. But anyway, the Whitey Caldwell thing, because Brian, you found some of his rookie pictures in your wrestling news files, or not even rookie pictures, but when he was still in wrestling school, the first pictures he had taken. And that was what, maybe 69, 70-ish, that part of time, because initially after he wrestled he was obviously from Massachusetts legitimately, and wrestled some in New England, and I think he got a few Canadian dates, small shows, whatever. But his first territory was he was in East Tennessee. For Knoxville was John Kazana promoting, and then the Tri-Cities, Kingsport, John City, Bristol. By that point, Ron Wright was running it behind the scenes, but nobody knew he was the top heel. Nobody knew that publicly. But what they would do is after Ron Wright and Whitey Caldwell, who, as we've talked about before, and the Smoky Mountain fans know, was the all-time top babyface in the territory. Well, Ron and Whitey had been working a program with each other on and off for 10 years, right? The chain matches and all that shit. And since Ron's partner, Don Wright, was a wrestler also, and the Wright brothers were a big heel team, they would give Whitey different babyface partners through the years so that he could face the Wright brothers in tag matches and freshen it up. And Les Thatcher did that in, I think, was it 72, 73? He might have followed Kevin Sullivan.
Was it that late that Les Thatcher was there?
Or was he there before Kevin? Was it late 60s?
That's what I thought. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, you know what? I'm probably wrong too. But nevertheless, yes, ladies and gentlemen, Les Thatcher was a young, spry white meat babyface at one point in time, back when people still saw in black and white. It probably was the late 60s now that I think about it, because he was there at the same time as Don and Al Green, and that was late 60s. Nevertheless, it was like 1971. Kevin Sullivan gets booked his very first territory in the wrestling business. He's never been out of New England. He's as Boston as you can get, and he ends up in the hills of East Tennessee being Whitey Caldwell's partner against the Wright brothers. And the deal was the young babyface would sell and the Wrights would get the heat on him and whatever, and then he'd make the tag to Whitey, who the people thought was the toughest man in the world, and he'd clean house. And so anyway, Kevin told me a story years ago, and I can't tell it as good as he told it, and also the accent. But he said the first week they have a tag match and they get wild and everything, and maybe it's a disqualification or whatever. And the second week, they have no disqualification match and all kinds of shit happens, whatever. And so they come back the third week in a cage. And even back then in those days, I don't know what kind of cage they may have had in, it was probably in Kingsport. It might have been chicken wire, because they were still using that in Tennessee in the 70s. They just bring out a roll of chicken wire when the guys got in the ring and wrap it around the fucking ring post. But it's a cage match, and they go to him ahead of time and say, kid, we're going to need you to get a little color tonight. And, you know, at this time, he's never done that before, right? He's go, oh, okay. And I can't remember whether it's Ron or Don. I think it may have been Donnie. Said, oh, don't worry, kid, we'll handle it for you. And he's like, what the fuck? So they get in the match, and obviously, besides it's a cage match, everybody's got a chain in their pocket or a fucking roll of quarters or some kind of Tennessee gimmick. And they're going to have this wild match. And when it came time for Kevin to get to color, this is when he found out about the chisel. The wedge that, and Bo James still has one of these, an actual legitimate Wright brothers fucking chisel that he has tweeted out pictures of at King of Kingsport. You can find him. But for the people who haven't heard the story, the Wright brothers, and Ron specifically, didn't want people smart to the wrestling business, and if they saw somebody blading, they get smart to the wrestling business. So Ron invented a shortcut. He went to a machinist shop and he had a piece of flat metal. He had the tip of a chisel sharpened down and put on the goddamn piece of flat metal that was high enough to go in your skin, but not deep enough to goddamn fracture your skull. And then they put tape around it so that the chisel part was sticking out, and they made it a set of brass knucks, kind of for real, but the tape cushioned the blow of the metal, but They would draw back and pop you on the forehead, and you would get color without having a blade. So the way Kevin told the story, he's like, and we're fighting and it's getting crazy. And then fucking, he said, yes, he said, it's Donnie. He said, Donnie grabbed him by the hair with the left hand. And he said, okay, kid, here comes your color. And he drew back and he said, Kevin said, we looked at his fist. It looked like he had a double bladed axe on the goddamn in the end of his fucking fist. And he punched him with it. Boom. And he goes down and he's bleeding. And at this point, Kevin says, fuck these fucking hillbillies. It's all been a plot. They've got me down here. They're going to fucking kill me. This is a double cross. I've got to defend myself. And he pulls his chain out of his fucking tights and wraps it around his fist and gets back up and punches Donnie in the face as hard as he can and busts his fucking cheek open. And down goes Donnie. And Kevin gets on top of him. He's going to beat him to death. And Donnie looked up at him and said, "Attaway, kid, lay it in. That's the way we like it down here." And he's a fuck. And he just started freaking out. What do I fucking do? He dropped the chain and everything. He was thinking about climbing out, and they fucking grabbed him and started working with him. That was his introduction to Tennessee wrestling.
And not the end of his relationship with Tennessee wrestling. Again, that's the early 70s. He would end up there again in the early 80s. That's, I guess, where you would first get to know him or get to
Well, hold
him,
on.
Right?
No. He went to Memphis from there. Kevin Sullivan, as a young babyface, worked for Goulas from the time that he left Knoxville after that run was over with through sometime in 1972. I'd have to go back and look at Tuesday Night at the Gardens, the wonderful book on that era. But he had worked this territory in the early 70s, the Memphis territory as well. And then I think from there, did he not? He had an early run in Georgia also, did he not? But nevertheless, maybe I'm thinking wrong. But he started going to some of the major territories. Everybody that's been talking about his career and all of the tributes that have come out have focused on, well, they kind of start with the Varsity Club and, there's the 90s WCW and everything, but he had been a star in almost every territory he worked in.
And the Florida stuff, I feel like the again, it's not Satan, he's not the devil, but
yeah,
the dark side Kevin Sullivan kind of not overwhelmed, but it's kind of the thing people most think about. Because in one way or another, even with the Varsity Club, he kind of still held on to that persona.
Yeah, well, that's why the clips are easier to find, and everybody has seen, more of that was on TBS, etc. But he didn't start the Sullivan's Dark Army of Darkness, the whole 9 yards, until what, 82 or
right after he left Memphis. Remember,
that's right.
He left Memphis because there was a thing on TV when he returned. And I want to say it was Lance Russell interviewing Steve Kern as like a warning to the fans of Florida, the promoters in Florida. He's a different guy. He's not the Kevin Sullivan, the friendly, I'm going to tag up with Mike Graham, Kevin Sullivan. That guy's gone. There's something different about this guy. And that was his return. And then, of course, that's when the whole gimmick change happened.
So that was 1982. He's 12 years into his career. And the early Florida run, where he was the partner of Mike Graham and one of the top baby faces in the state, gets overlooked because that was really the pre-home video era for any but the most fanatical. But Kevin, again, when I did a Back to the Territories interview with him, we talked extensively about that period because he looked like Mike Graham. They were about the same height. Mike Graham in those days, not the thin, late 80s wrestler or WCW executive. He was a power lifter, so he was bulky. And Kevin, even though he was short, he was bulky because in those early years, he was more into powerlifting and, strength. And when they grew a mustache, they looked like brothers. So it was almost like you had a Graham brothers. That's the way Eddie Graham used them. Mike Graham and Kevin Sullivan, for some period of time, were joined at the hip, indistinguishable in Florida wrestling.
Actually, for a time, Eddie Graham was closer with Kevin than he was his own son, apparently.
Well, yeah, that's another issue, is that Eddie and Mike had the Graham family, and we won't get into a sub-reference here, but the Graham family dynamics at various points in time, people were on the outs, and Eddie had taken Kevin more of a son. He was out in a fishing boat, and he was confiding things in him that more than Mike at one point. And that's another reason why that, I mean, when everybody says, oh, what a great mind, a lot of the fans, he was a booker, but they don't understand that he got to actually sit in a fucking boat with Eddie Graham and have a personal relationship with him and learn all of that shit. So he not only, he could book, or he could call a finish, or he could just, look at a guy and say, you ought to do this, or you ought to more of that, or less of that, or whatever. And it was carrying that, that business on. When Flair was the booker in WCW, Kevin was his assistant, but Kevin was the only one who had booked. Between me and Rick and Kevin, he's the only one that had actually been a booker. So he was kind of like showing Flair, as we've talked about, had the big time ideas and the major programs and made the major decisions, but it was like, Kevin knew how to put it together. That's how I was able to learn something about it. He was assisting or involved with a lot more people who were booking at the time when they were successful. Did I make sense of that statement? Even if he wasn't official, he had a hand in things.
When you think of his run in Georgia, I always love that match, him and Tony Atlas against Alexis Smirnoff and Ivan Koloff, where they use the ether and then they interview the fans who I'm a nurse, and that was ether. Like,
yes.
It gets it over so good. But he was great as a babyface there, and who was in charge? That was Bill Watts as one of the co-owners. That may have been at that point Ole and Bill Watts booking, or Bill Watts alone booking, but he was there in Georgia under people that he didn't have the same relationship with that he did Eddie Graham, but again, he was exposed to a lot of the top minds.
Well, and they did show some footage or a couple of clips on the tribute that the WWE did, and we got to recognize them because we said, oh, Sika got 2 minutes because The Rock's on the board of directors, but Kevin got 2 minutes and he never even worked there. So it's the new regime. So we got to recognize him for
Pro
that.
Wrestling, though.
Oh, come on.
Him and Mark Lewin and the Fallen Angel.
Well, yes, they did, but still, I don't think we're going that far. And by the way, if we do make a couple of wisecracks during the course of this, Kevin would be jamming. Brian, I can't do the fucking accent. I sound like Jericho going, Derek. But, make some jokes. What is this, a fucking funeral?
He used to, every now and then, I never knew what it was sometimes that triggered him to text me or leave me a voicemail. And it would just be like, Brian, you're a great therapist. Okay. But, I like that. I would hear feedback from him. And sometimes he would be listening to something that I had recorded a while back. And I would get recently, or the most recent text I got from him was out of nowhere. Great job on the Atlanta War podcast. I'm like, wow, that was a long time ago. He was just listening to it.
He just found it. But I've got a couple of voicemails that I've saved and recorded for posterity for myself that I probably, if I played them from Kevin, it would hurt the feelings of some people who may love him. But he'd be like, you're completely right. He's a fucking idiot. What the fuck are they doing?
I've got a few of those too, but probably not as good as yours.
But anyway, where were we going with that? Oh, so they showed some clips. He had a run in the WWF as a babyface, Kevin Sullivan. What was that, 1976? Because of the relationship that Eddie Graham had with Vince Sr. in the Florida and New York pipeline. So he had already worked for Vince Sr. By the mid 70s. Add that to Watts and Ole and Eddie Graham. And then Knoxville, Kevin was not before he was a heel in the, in the 80s. And, we talked about that he at one point, one of the TV stations had him just introducing clips of other wrestling promotions when there was no local promotion in town because they wanted wrestling. And he was the guy that they had hosted. But when Ron Fuller was running Southeastern the first time around, by what was it, 77, 78, Kevin was a huge fucking babyface there for a couple of years. He was a babyface there during the 1979 78 WFIA convention.
And that was coming off his run, the last big babyface star in San Francisco, him and Bob Roop. That was right before that.
Yeah, where they revitalized the business for Roy Shire, and then Roop tried to steal the territory and killed it again.
And then Kevin ended up in Knoxville to watch Roop try to do that exact same move.
Yes, and then here comes Roop and kills the goddamn territory again. Jesus Christ. But fortunately, by then, Kevin went to fucking Georgia, did he not?
Yeah, that's right.
Again, he's on TBS, or he's in the middle of a hot territory, or he's revitalizing something, or he's working for these, smart fucking people. And then the reason why that I was excited to see him before he even came to Memphis, his first Tennessee run, 1971 or what, it was right before me. So I'd seen the name in the newspaper ads, but until cable became a thing, we'd seen him on TBS and heard his reputation from Florida. But at that point in time, the Tennessee territory, it was still a big deal when a major name from national television came in as a regular. Not necessarily to make Memphis shots or to fight Lawler or whatever, but as a regular on the card. And Kevin was a big name at that time. So when he came in here and they instantly, aligned him with Jimmy Hart, the top heel faction, he and Wayne Ferris, Danny Davis, and a rotating cast as the second Nightmare when David Oswald quit the business and Ted Allen dumbed himself out of position. But, he could talk then. And as a heel, it was different because he had been a babyface most of the time that you'd seen or heard of him. But also, you've seen the pictures just yesterday. At that point, all of a sudden, Kevin Sullivan, that had been a big barrel-chested power lifter, he was fucking ripped. He had gotten into bodybuilding, and I think at one point he dieted down to like 188 pounds. He had fucking 8 abs. The goddamn definition was insane. And that's when, didn't he do a bodybuilding contest at that point with somebody?
They had footage of it on Georgia TV. I want to say it was Tony Atlas.
Yes.
But I'm not certain, but I think it was Tony Atlas.
But anyway, he goes from 5'8", 270 to 5'8", 188 and 2% body fat. And then that was a real good run as a heel for him here, even though he was still he was Kevin Sullivan, a regular person, right? But then, as you said, by the time that he finished the run here in Memphis and went back to Florida, he was fixing to go the whole heel route. And this was kind of a dry run for at least working in the ring.
Well, he was in the First Family with Jimmy Hart, and that's a great period for the First Family. But, Kevin, and I haven't listened to it in a while, but in the many conversations I had with him, I want to say he indicated that before he went back to Florida, he either thought he was going to be, or he was led to believe that he may be one of the bookers or get a chance to book. Do you remember anything about that? In Memphis?
Well, see, that was when I was still a photographer. So I would not have been sitting around in the locker room listening to people complain because I wasn't in there yet. But I can believe he was led to believe that by somebody, not saying who, could have been one of several people, but I can't see it ever actually happening because not because he couldn't or because, he wouldn't do a good job, but because Jarrett, he owned the company. Lawler was not a 50% partner in 1981, but still he had a percentage of Memphis. And if Lawler wasn't the booker, Dundee was going to be. Except, and the one time they went outside the circle was Robert Fuller, and that didn't end well. So I don't know unless Jim Barnett or Eddie Graham were telling Jerry Jarrett, oh, you've got to do this. I don't think he would have done it just because Kevin was not a homesteader. And they tried to keep it in a circle.
And again, he returns to Florida, and this is really the...
And let me make this point. And then if Eddie Graham or Jim Barnett was telling Jerry Jarrett, you ought to do this, and he was thinking about it, then Lawler was figuring out a way to say, oh... And maybe Dundee would have been fine with what Little Man wanted to do, but I think Lawler would be, wait a minute.
Well, he would return to Florida, and this is really where we would see his creativity come out for the first time. At first, it's him and Jake Roberts, and then slowly they add people. Everyone remembers Mark Lewin walking out of the water, the purple haze emerging from the sea. But this is really kind of Kevin's creativity unleashed. Both with Dusty there at the beginning in 83, and then after Dusty leaves Florida, the show kind of becomes all about Kevin Sullivan and his stable.
And by the way, that's where I researched bringing Leviathan up out of the Ohio River was the Purple Haze deal. Because Kevin at that point, I think Florida was a perfect territory for that because they weren't going to get heat with the TV station because Eddie Graham had such wonderful, goodwill and was involved in every civic organization in the goddamn state, right? And always getting awards. So they were pretty safe with the TV, but also what made it, I've talked to Kevin a couple of times about this also, was he had massive heat and his group had massive heat with much of the fan population, but there was that 10 or 15% in Florida of those weirdos that started either not only coming to support him, bringing him snakes, traveling around to see him. Remember the Kevin Sullivan fans van is the one that got burned in the parking lot that time. Do you remember that story?
No.
They had some group of, several, alternatively thinking individuals who were into whatever they thought Kevin's group was, right? For real, and the snakes and the fucking, they were driving around following him into the town. And they got so much heat with the other fans because they were trying to support Kevin Sullivan and his group that the other fans set fire to their goddamn devil van that these fans were driving around in the parking lot of the wrestling matches. And because everybody believed it either one way or another, right? It was like 90 against, but 10-4. And that made it really fucking intense for people. And they could get away with doing wacky things because they believed that Kevin was off his fucking rocker.
And Kevin took it really far, at times maybe even too far, but he took it really far, but there were lengths he didn't want to go. Didn't he get, I don't know if mad's the right word, but upset when the Aftermags had a quote attributed to him that was made up? They're like, I am the devil, or I worship the devil.
Oh, yeah, yes. See, that's the thing. He never said Satan. He never said the devil. It was non-denominational devil worship, if you will. It was just a cult or a group or a band of wild, weird, wacky personalities, and he let people's imagination take it into, people would have sworn that he was slaughtering goats in praise of Satan and drinking blood in the moonlight. He didn't do any of that shit. Never said devil, never said. Now, Dusty Dusty would say that, Kevin Sullivan, you little devil. Shit like that, but no, he never said Satan, never said devil, never mentioned God. But it was what
That's
people
right.
imagined it to be.
But the things he did talk about, you remember. Abu Dhabi,
Yes.
the Tree of Woe. Like, these were the
Yes.
things we heard about.
I have taken the beetle nut. Him and Mark Lewin were taking some beetle nuts on planes over to the fucking Pacific Rim. They were always where Steve Ricard over there, different shows. King Curtis.
Is the Purple Haze the most successful wrestler named after a strain of weed?
Well, or either that or a Hendrix song, one or the other.
Well, same thing.
And there's a little LSD involved in there also, which is where King Curtis came in handy. But where were we going with this? Now you've thrown me off.
And it's interesting, too, if you look at the people Kevin would end up not only surrounding himself with, but getting along with and being a liaison, maybe the last connection in some ways they have to the wrestling world. Mark Lewin, King Curtis, The Sheik. It's interesting the people that he forged relationships with.
Kevin is the one who set up or helped facilitate the Sheik to come back to Crockett for the summer '88 Great American Bash in Detroit, that the most successful show Crockett ever ran there, because Sheik was in the main event. And but also Kevin would facilitate, as we talked about, the international shit. And that went back before the 90s and or, Victor Quinones in Florida going to Japan with his group, or Steve Ricard doing something, in Singapore, or the Polynesian Pro Wrestling bringing in guys from Japan, and then Kevin getting on one Smoky Mountain Wrestling TV taping. I had Miguel Perez Jr., Bill DeMott, who at the time was Crash the Terminator.
Crash the Terminator. What a cool name.
Yeah. Kanamura, the Japanese guy, bless his little pea-picking heart.
Yukihiro Kanamura, later Wing Kanamura.
And somebody and Taz, I think, was on that same taping. Because he was always keeping track of who and what was going on in wrestling outside of the big companies, if he wasn't in a big company, and was, working on deals for everybody. And side note, he's the one, Kevin, God damn it, I've told you this in person. He was the one that told me, oh, this guy gigs his arm. Like, what the fuck? For those of you, and I will now blame Kevin. For those of you who know, but for those of you who don't know.
Most gruesome match in American wrestling television history.
So Kevin is a heel in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. He has been the one Brian Lee, primetime Brian Lee was the top babyface at the time. We were struggling, ladies and gentlemen. But suddenly these weirdos and these creeps and these monsters start attacking him from out of nowhere. You had this big Mongolian guy, the Mongolian Mauler. I think he just passed away not long ago. Mr. Peter R. Miller. One of the weirdest fucking people, in a nice way, weirdest fucking people I ever met in a business of weird people. Oh, goddamn. The night we had him hide under the ring at the TV taping to fucking come out and goddamn attack Brian Lee, right, as another emissary sent by this mysterious force. He's under the ring when the people come in the door. And it's on the second taping, so he's got to be under there for like 2 hours, 15 minutes. And in the first taping, it's Robert Fuller and Jimmy Golden, the stud stable, and they're beating up whoever they're working with, and it's getting wild, and Jimmy Golden goes, and he's going to look under the ring, see if he can pull out a chair, and he fucking flips the apron skirt back, and he comes face to face with the Mongolian Mauler, who he doesn't know is under the ring. It scared the shit out of him.
Oh, he had those contact lenses too, remember?
Yes. He had contact lenses that Mongolian did. It made his fucking eyes all black and a goddamn giant fucking bulbous bald head with a fucking little thing of hair sticking out on top. And Jimmy Golden was looking him nose to nose when he was looking for a chair under the ring. Oh, goddamn, he said. And he throws the fucking flap back. And anyway,
Hey,
so
how did you signal him that it was time for him to do his thing?
Hildebrand was, I think, somehow bammed 4 times on the fucking mat or whatever, I believe. You know, I mean, this is low budget. But anyway, not germane. There'd been Adam Bomb, Brian Clark, the Night Stalker. He did something, and Kevin finally is revealed as the master, the secret fucking manipulator behind all of this band of weirdos when he came in the ring and he stabbed Brian Lee in the head with the golden spike like fucking, I don't know, 25 times or whatever. And Brian bled like you'd run him through a razor blade factory. And we instituted the goddamn red X up over the screen like they did in the 70s in the WWF so that we wouldn't get kicked off television showing all this blood, and it made it even, oh my God. So now Kevin says, Jimmy, I can't do the accent. We can get the spike over. These guys from that Victor was booking in Japan, Miguel and DeMott, and also Kanamura with the wing promotion, I guess, or whatever they were doing over there. Well, can they come and be on the American television, and the Japanese photographers will be there? Got a big spread on Smoky Mountain in the Japanese papers. And he said, and Kanamura, who get to spike over, he blades his arm. And at the time, you know, every once in a while, Dusty had done it, and the Sheik had done it when the doctor told him he couldn't fucking cut his head anymore. It wouldn't bleed. He'd cut his head and fucking sand would come out. So I said, are you sure? Yeah, okay. Oh, yeah, he does it over there. All right. You know, there's no athletic commission in Tennessee. I'm not going to get my promoter's license booted. He'll get a little color from the arm, you know, like Dusty has done or the Sheik's done or whatever. And so they have the match, and finally Kevin pulls out the fucking golden spike, and he fucking stabs him in the arm with it. And I see the guy go down, and he made a little swipe, and then didn't see anything, and then I see him doing something else. I'm like, what the fuck? I guess it just ain't gonna work, right? And then I see him do something else, and then you see, Brian, you remember you remember Brian Hildebrand, Mark Curtis, when he walks over to look, because now Kevin's trying to work on him with the spike, and they're doing whatever they're doing. And you don't see really any blood, but then all of a sudden, Brian Hildebrand walks over and looks out and just gets that look on his face that Brian used to get when he was seeing something he shouldn't see, and he just kind of turns around and walks off. And he told me later on, it was the sickest thing. This guy had cut down the side of his arm, the bicep level, big enough it looked like you could lay his fucking fingers in, but it wasn't bleeding. And then all of a sudden it started bleeding. And so anyway, it still didn't. Brian Lee, by drinking 2 beers and taking a couple of aspirins, bled more from a fucking 1.5-inch blade job to the head than this fucking guy did when he just about dismembered or decapitated, what's the word, amputated his fucking arm.
Yeah, it was really gruesome, really disgusting.
And I don't think Kevin assumed he was going to be doing that either, but whatever the guy did, he cut it somewhere where this expert at arm blading cut it where you wouldn't bleed anyway until you got down to the goddamn bone or whatever. And let me put the period on the end of the goddamn story and remember where you were going. So we're back in the back. I said, they're wrapping this guy's arm up. They've called an ambulance. I said, what the fuck is he? Why did he do that? I don't know, Jimmy. It worked before, whatever, but they take the guy. Now think about this. You know where Pigeon Forge, Tennessee is, don't you?
I do.
Well, we are in Sevierville, which is legitimately Sevierville was actually a town when Pigeon Forge was just a wide spot in the road, but now Pigeon Forge is a tourist attraction. This small fucking podunk town at the high school gym, and I think the fire department took him to the goddamn hospital He's a Japanese guy, still dressed in his wrestling outfit, with what looks to be a severe fucking knife wound running down his goddamn arm, doesn't speak a lick of English. And he comes in at 11 o'clock on a Monday night. Everybody in fucking town heard about this fucking guy. It didn't draw us a dime, but it was the goddamn biggest story in history in fucking Sevierville, Tennessee to ever happen on a Monday night at least. They had never seen anything like it.
But Kevin's run in Smoky Mountain overall, I think, is pretty underrated. It's one of the runs I enjoy. It was the first and maybe the only time I ever enjoyed the Night Stalker. Because remember, he had that match with Sid Vicious at the Clash of Champions.
Yes.
That everyone said at that point. Things have been a lot worse since. But people said that was the worst match ever. And then he really didn't do much. He had Ox Baker guiding his career. And then he ended up there with Kevin.
The worst manager ever.
But when he ended up with Kevin, it worked. Like, that was the perfect guy to stand behind Kevin.
But here was the thing. I had booked Brian Clark, Night Stalker, independently of Kevin. You know why?
Paul Orndorff.
He lived in Atlanta, and he was driving Paul Orndorff. And Paul said, would you do me a favor? Because when he said, will you do me a favor and book this guy who's going to drive me? I said, what's his name? The Night Stalker. I was like, oh, Jesus Christ, because I'd seen the match, right, with Sid. But he said, no, I'm working with him. So Paul had been working with him a little bit. And then once that Kevin saw him, he said, he's perfect because the Night Stalker, right? Why wouldn't he be perfect for Kevin Sullivan? And that's what Kevin was able to take him. And as part of that, the angle that Kevin was doing where he led the group, which then we tailored down to the Night Stalker for budget reasons. But the group, and he was a heel, and he was involved in things without the pressure of being a single main event guy as green as he was on being on Brian Clark.
You know, the other thing I think about with Smoky Mountain is I didn't get to go to the first fan week in 93. I went in 94 and 95. But Scott Cornish, the late Scott Cornish, the noted wrestling humorist, always talked about the biggest welcome to Smoky Mountain moment for those fans in 93 was that first show, Kevin Sullivan versus the Mongolian Stomper. I want to say it was Morristown, maybe. And they wrestled in and out of the building. And again, the Mongolian Stomper hadn't really been doing much. So it was just this wild brawl, and now we're all used to them. They're everywhere. But not everyone was doing that then. Kevin was one of the pioneers, I hate to say it in some ways, of that brawl around the building, but it worked. And again, that was one of those memorable matches that people still talked about.
Yeah, and he took it because they were doing it in Japan. Brody and those guys were doing it in Japan, and it was easier to get away with because the Japanese people wouldn't sue you, right? But like you said, people weren't seeing that every match, every show on a regular basis. And I let the people do it that I could trust. And you trust Kevin, not going to get in trouble, not going to fucking be reckless with some gimmick and decapitate some kid. But also Kevin understood from his previous run in Knoxville in 78 who the Stomper was. So he was a big star that would come in and work at that time with Archie, the Mongolian Stomper had respect amongst a certain era of the boys because, Bret Hart said the greatest heel in the history of Stampede Wrestling. And
I think he may have said the greatest heel in the history of Canada wrestling,
in the history of Canada, and it probably still be. Yeah, Joe LeDuc might want a word, but no, LeDuc was a babyface up there, so nevertheless. But also with Archie in Knoxville, because Kevin had been there in 78, he was the hottest heel in the history of that town, and Archie'd been retired for like 5 years at that point. He was working for the sheriff's department, but he still he rode his bicycle. What was he, 56 maybe when he started working for me? He rode his bicycle every day to work at the sheriff's department 7 miles each way. And he looked fucking great. So he became our go-to babyface monster. They weren't going to boo him anymore. He wasn't in the business of getting heat full time anymore, but he was such a name there that if If you brought him in and made him the monster, he didn't have to speak. He was the equalizer or a special tag partner, whatever the case. The people loved it, and Kevin knew how to work with him. So, and you set the tone from the start. As soon as the people heard, I played the theme from Halloween for him. Ding, 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 ding. And here comes fucking Archie. He hits the ring. They fight. They go everywhere, in and out, whatever the fuck. It's crazy. So the boot comes into play. Something fucking happens. And whether it's a DQ or the heel gets beat, you don't beat the stomper. And it worked for 3 fucking years, a couple times a year. Like Rough House Fargo, we could bring Archie back. But
it started with Kevin, too, because remember, it was Christmas Chaos 92, I think, when Brian Lee was hurt. Someone had to come and defend, I guess, Brian Lee. It was the Mongolian Stomper.
The honor of him. What honor, you say? No, but yeah. And then one of the greatest ones we did was after, I think Archie had worked probably with Kevin in Johnson City at Freedom Hall. And we're doing a backstage interview with somebody else, right? In the locker room. The announcer is standing there and he's interviewing whoever this is. And all of a sudden you hear bam, boom from the next room. And then a door flies open. And somebody, I think it might have been Brian Hildebrand, Mark Curtis, runs out and says, he's loose, run. And then somebody else flies out of the room, and then there comes the fucking stomper around the corner with his boot in his hand. And he charges down the hall, and people are screaming, get out of the way. And he goes across, and he knocks down the heel door and fucking gets on Kevin. And you see the boot flying and everything. People love shit like that. We treated him like the Frankenstein monster, and Kevin was the perfect opponent for him because he knew how to fucking heel him down or use an object to get an advantage or, when to not beat up the monster. Because to a lot of guys that had names at that point, Archie would have looked like a well-conditioned man in his 60s and probably not given him the deference that he deserved. Where were we going with that?
We were just talking about Kevin and Smoky Mountain and the various places Kevin was and ended up and the people he worked with.
Well, and going back also, but one thing, the Triple Tower of Doom. Do you remember that?
Yeah, unfortunately, 88.
88. But here's the thing. The whole thing leading up to that and the execution of that and the story behind that, Kevin sat down with me on Crockett's Plain one night before that whole thing unfolded and explained it to me. And I thought it was the greatest goddamn thing I'd ever heard of in the history of wrestling. The problem became in actual execution. Other people had to do it and you had to see it and you had to put it on television. And you needed Kevin Sullivan talking to you for an hour and a half and then it would have been the greatest thing you'd ever seen. As long as you didn't see it, you just heard Kevin tell you about it. He could make even those ideas. It was very intricate, as I recall. It's so much so that I can't remember what any of the details were, but I was fucking captivated.
As a fan, you were captivated until you saw it, and then you're like, "This is not good." I hope they never bring it back. And then they brought it back for Hogan, remember?
Well, but if you got to bring something stinky back, bring it back for Hulk.
They brought it back so Hogan could beat like 9 heels in one night or whatever it was, including the returning Zeus and Jeep Swenson.
Yeah, there's a couple of names out of the distant past. But, and that was Kevin having to work, unfortunately, with, the largest ego in the business, but he was trying to make things happen.
He made it work, though. I mean, he kind of always put it so that he had or the way he saw it was he had to gain Hogan's trust as a booker.
Yeah.
And he did it. Unfortunately, he had to do a lot of stuff that catered more to Hogan than the fans at different times, but at the end of the day, we said it the other day when Who Killed WCW, if you look at who built WCW, Kevin's responsible for a lot of the good things that happened, and he has almost no responsibility for the fall of WCW. So
Yeah.
he's certainly one of the heroes of the WCW story.
And as we mentioned also when we talked about the first time they killed WCW, Kevin was not only part of, but pretty much the experienced, steady hand in the room behind the only successful period that they had from 1988 to fucking 1996, and that was when Flair was Booker, but Kevin was the only guy that had ever done that before. And then yes, and there was Jim Herd was on the committee, and Jim Barnett, who, as we've talked about, was not there to contribute ideas on paper for matches or finishes. Jody Hamilton, who was snoring quite a bit and not given a lot of responsibility. Jim Ross, who was the beleaguered announcer who had to call whatever fucking came up. Myself, who had been booking for a grand total of one day, the first day that I was on the fucking job. So, Kevin structured the fucking thing just by lack of, guidance elsewhere.
What was the quote that was always attributed to him when Herd wanted to cut Flair's hair or something, and he said, like, would you change Mickey Mantle's number?
No, I think it was Babe Ruth.
Babe Ruth?
I think it changed Babe Ruth's number. That's the whole thing. He had to suffer through the Spartacus and the Jim Herd, the Ding Dongs, and the Hunchback. He was there for the Hunchbacks. Kevin was in the room for the Hunchback pitch and an Ole shutdown. Everybody's heard that story. Am I repeating myself?
It's been a while, and there are a lot of fans who may not know the legacy of Jim Herd's creative ideas.
Well, the Ding Dongs were such a major success. Ding Dong! That Herd pitched the idea of the Hunchbacks. They were a tag team of Hunchbacks, and the idea was that they were unbeatable because you couldn't pin them since they were hunchbacks and you couldn't get both shoulders on the goddamn mat at the same time. And he pitched this in front of me and Ric Flair and Kevin Sullivan and Jim Ross, and Ole Anderson was in the room at that point in time, and a few others, and we all suffered through it. And then Ole, being the fucking one that you would think he would be the one, said, all right, Jim, then book me and Arn against the fucking Hunchbacks, and I'll slap a fucking submission hold on him and make him give up and beat him in 30 seconds. Well, goddammit, Ole, you know what I'm talking about.
It's interesting, too, in between WCW, because he was there, I want to say he left by 91, and then he returned in 94. In that period in between, he had to make a living. He worked indies like everyone does. And he did some overseas tours, and he did various things, but, he stayed relevant with the relevant things happening on what was then the independent scene, whether it was Smoky Mountain Wrestling, I don't know if you consider yourself an independent, or ECW. After Eddie Gilbert left,
yeah,
one of the first people Paul Lee brought in was Kevin Sullivan. I don't think him and Eddie Gilbert may have coexisted well together at that point, so after Eddie was gone, one of the many changes, Kevin Sullivan came in.
Eddie would have shit himself if Kevin had come in, because, Eddie was about being the booker and Kevin had been a booker, whereas Paul was about being a booker with smart people to help him be a booker.
And Kevin Sullivan was teaming up with Taz. And that was one of the first things that really elevated Taz from just being the guy that you used to see on ICW TV or IWCCW against Ray Odyssey or Tommy Dreamer, to seeing him as being an emerging talent.
The Tasmaniac.
Yeah, well, the Tasmaniac. A lot of that's Paul Lee, the way he used him, but a lot of that was the credibility of Kevin Sullivan teaming with him.
Well, and that's the thing, is that Kevin got Taz down for the volunteer slam that year. We did the Rage in the Cage. That's why Taz was in it. Now that I think of it, it was Kevin had got Taz because I needed an extra fucking heel. That's why he was working Knoxville. That's why he was working ECW. As you said, he also did the international dates. And he was still living in Florida, but he was trying to make sure that he knew what was going on and had spots in various places. And, as you said, stayed because there was no such thing as independent wrestling and internet publicity at that time in those days. It was all the magazines, and regional television can add up if it's seen in the right places. And as long as he's got his finger in 4 or 5 different things going on, he's always got something going on. Because Kevin was smart to how the business worked. And when he saw most of the territories going away, he knew he just needed to expand and concentrate.
And you and Paulie both knew that you would be willing to accept promos from him on the beach.
Yes. but that's the thing. Well, like I said when we were talking last month about him, he would go above and beyond. Instead of standing in front of a brick wall, he would find a place that looked good. He did one of the promos that he sent in he was reenacting the fucking bar scene with the bartender from The Shining. And you got the extra bonus of Nancy's arm or hand reaching into the scene every once in a while to hand him a drink or to be an off-camera, fucking personality of some kind. And he would put everything into it. It wouldn't be like just, I'm coming. He would think about it. And we'd talk on the phone about, what you want to do in the finish. What can we come back with? I wasn't just booking him for dates. It was, okay, here's what we'll do, and here's who you're working with, and blah, blah, blah. And he always obviously had great ideas on what to do with it.
Was it Smoky Man or ECW? There was one promo I remember he did on the beach where he starts like at a distance, and he doesn't say anything, and it starts with him just walking fast right towards the camera. And it was intimidating. It was like, oh my God, what's he going to do? But he would return to WCW as a babyface, team with Cactus Jack against the Nasty Boys, a memorable match in Philadelphia at Slamboree. And then, of course, and I guess we should send our sympathies to his brother Dave, Evad Sullivan.
Oh, good Lord.
Remember, they brought him and they gave him a goofy brother. That was how they brought Kevin Sullivan back to WCW.
Yes, and he was dyslexic, so his name wasn't Dave, it was Evad.
And he was a Hulkamaniac.
What was his name? He was a fairly nice guy. I think I met him a time or two.
He had been wrestling as the Equalizer.
I can't remember his real name.
It has to be Dave something, because why else would you just assert Dave there? Is his name Dave Sullivan?
I can't, well, that's a fine Irish name now, goddammit. But, see, even the great ones are sometimes saddled with questionable creative. But, everybody just thought, well, if it's weird, Kevin can make it work, because he usually does.
I guess we should talk a little bit about everything in WCW with him and Nancy and Chris Benoit and everything afterwards. I've always had a problem with people who, it cost Kevin a lot of his good name.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people who were friends with Chris Benoit, who had become friends with Nancy, just were insistent that Kevin was this awful, awful guy. I think it was revealed when we had him on the show 4 years ago that Nancy had been arrested for abuse on Kevin, not the other way around. And
what?
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and by the way, what we're referencing, folks, 4 years ago, a Dark Side of the Ring episode aired on the Benoit and Nancy Benoit tragedy, and Kevin was not on the program. And so therefore, even though, other people may have tried to a bit, his story, his side was not represented well in the episode. And we had, Brian and I had him on the show here, which you can find it on the YouTube channel. Official Jim Cornette is what I'm talking about. I'm not trying to be commercial, but everybody should hear that, because he was not on the show because he turned down the request to be on the show because of a promise he had made to Nancy's parents.
Yeah, he was waiting for permission from them. He said that was the only thing that would hold him up from talking about it was he wanted her parents to give him permission. Dark Side put up some text on the screen saying that he declined to be interviewed, but that was kind of not the whole story, and we had Kevin on to tell the story.
And to be honest, Nancy's sister, not a fan of Kevin's, which has colored some viewpoints on a situation. But Nancy was a handful, and everybody has issues with their personal lives. But what really just disgusted me was these stupid people, because the people, Kevin Sullivan had something to do with it. It wasn't Chris Benoit. That whole bunch of bullshit. You'd have to be a complete fucking imbecile on the verge of being locked up for your own safety rather than being out in public to believe that Kevin had something to do with any of their deaths. So what it amounted to was a bunch of fucking assholes acting like assholes, trying to be assholes, and malign and slander somebody that was more successful than they would ever be at anything. And that's what makes me mad, because it's not like a great amount of people believed it. You couldn't. It's fucking stupid. But a great amount of people would say it because they thought that made them special in some way.
Yeah, and Kevin took a lot of hits, and he was quiet. He didn't say anything, and he took a lot of hits. And as time has gone by and different things have come out, I think you could say Kevin was really treated horribly by a lot of people, and that Chris Benoit was always the bad guy. You know, he was abusive, not just at the end, but he was abusive. He was hooked on drugs, loaded to the tits on steroids, and it was easy for everyone to point the finger at Kevin as being the problem. But Kevin, like I said, he took a lot of hits. Triple H had very nice words to say about him in that tribute video on SmackDown, and they did a very nice job with that. Next time you're going to use any of my images, ask for permission. But, it's like he said all these nice things. What a great mind he was. And he was. We were talking to him in recent years. He was. Why not give him a job at some point? Why not bring him in and use that mind? And Kevin, there are a lot of very small independent promotions and some medium-sized ones that benefited over the last 15, 20 years from Kevin's availability and his ability to go someplace and treat something seriously. And even if it's for one night, if he was going to be booking or helping with creative ideas, he took it very seriously. He was still trying to help wrestlers and promoters.
You know what? Here's the I would say sad thing. I mean, my God, he's been retired for a while now. But if the Triple H regime, the Paul Levesque regime, the Vince's absence, if that had happened 15 years ago, you may very well have seen that, because I think this was another example of Vince's, he's a wrestling guy, or, he doesn't understand what we do, something like that. It is always been the problem with getting certain people that Vince didn't grow up around, didn't serve him well for long periods of time, didn't work in his specific company. Success outside, as he was very lackadaisical in recognizing. And it wasn't like Kevin Dunn was going, we ought to get this Kevin Sullivan in here. He was, he's a wrestling guy, Vince, whatever. I think if now was 15 years ago and Triple H was in charge, I have a feeling that Kevin would have been being consulted on a variety of things.
Yeah, I mean, so many of the people who were involved with the failures of WCW, including the death of it, all were able to maintain employment in wrestling, whether it's in WWE or TNA. But Kevin, again, booker for the most successful periods, never got that chance. And a lot of it was because, the Benoits and that crew putting the mouth on him. They made him the bad guy, not just to, not to the promotion necessarily, but to fans. Once you heard that all these guys hated Kevin Sullivan, it made a lot of fans hate Kevin Sullivan. I think a lot of people for a very long time looked unfairly at Kevin, who, again, from my experience, the nicest possible guy.
Yeah.
And so giving with his time and his information and his knowledge. And I think his reputation, I think he's getting it back a lot now. But for years, it took a really unfair hit.
Well, and also think about this. Were they going to pick Kevin up in the WWE when Benoit and his guys had just gone there before WCW goes out of business? That was not an opportune time. But, that is, as you said, not only with the fans, but also with some of the boys. I can see where these guys would have gone, and if you hadn't worked with Kevin, this fucking guy.
Yeah, I mean, you can't say, like, he put the famous story is, they didn't want to work with him. He put the belt on Benoit, and then Benoit left. But you can't say Kevin wasn't a guy who put over or helped young wrestlers. He always did. Always. He helped make careers. Would Rick Steiner have become Rick Steiner without Kevin Sullivan? Would Mike Rotunda have ever been watchable without Kevin Sullivan? Mick Foley, would he have ever gotten a chance on national TV? I actually have a promo here a bunch of people have sent. Maybe I'll play you audio in a moment. Without Kevin Sullivan. And
nope.
The list goes on. And when you look at WCW, again, he was the booker. If there was a time where you enjoyed Nitro, 96, 97, he was the booker. So if there's stuff you enjoyed, make sure you give him some credit for it.
And I'll tell you one thing, though. Talk about getting people booked and spots and, working with promoters and everything. This was about goddamn 7 or 8 years ago. Kevin, I'm talking to him on the phone. He says, Jimmy, there's this guy, and I'm not going to call the guy's name, but there's this guy in West Virginia. He runs shows. He's great. He's got the money. The shows are great. The whole thing. He'd love to talk to you. Well, Kevin, if you say he's okay, all right, it's not that far down the road for me from West Virginia. So I call the guy, I get booked on his show. He's okay. It's at such and such gym in, God damn it, may have been Parkersburg, West Virginia. I can't remember now. Parkersburg, Clarksburg, somewhere in that area. But yeah, there's a big festival in town. There's going to be thousands of people in town. And we're going to have this big wrestling show, and the Rock and Roll Express are going to be there, and Warlord's going to be there, and Barbarian's going to be there, and some other people. Okay, goddamn. All right, I'll do it. And it's in the middle of the summer, Brian. And when I get there, they had not lied. They were exactly right. There was a big festival in town. There were thousands of people in town. Guess where the wrestling show was?
Where?
Not in fucking town.
Where was it?
It was down the road from it was like 5. I said, where is this goddamn festival? Because I show up at the building. There's an empty, it's like in a residential neighborhood. There's an empty goddamn parking lot for about 100 cars. And there's 2 in it, mine being one of them. And a trailer pulled up to this building. I said, where's the festival? Oh, it's in town. Where's that? About 5 miles down this road. You go and you'll get right into, God damn it. So it was like, yes, there was a festival there, but you couldn't see the goddamn wrestling from the festival. And get in this building, it's 90-something degrees. And by the way, Kevin is not there. Kevin's not booked on this show. Kevin, the jolly joker that he is, he said, oh, yeah, I got my money, but oh, yeah, the guy runs great shows. And he's off home in fucking... I think he'd moved to Washington by then. But nevertheless, I get in this building. If it's 97 degrees in the parking lot, it's 127 in this building because there's absolutely no air conditioning whatsoever. And it's one of the old gyms where the only windows are right up at the top of the general admission seats, right? And they can just open them like a foot. And that's supposed to cause some kind of... It looks like a fucking basketball gym from Hoosiers, right, in the 50s. And then I go to the locker rooms, and they're even hotter. And then I see them carting out this giant fan, and it's about 5 feet across, and they go to the concession stand and they get a bucket of ice, and they put a bucket of ice in front of this big fan and let it blow into the building. And I go and goddamn get a fucking chair and sit right in front of it. If you are less than 18 inches from this thing, it's actually comfortable. But more than that, and you're like in a sauna. And as soon as I had to take a piss and I get up out of my seat, the goddamn rock and roll comes in and sits there. So I have to goddamn kayfabe. But anyway, I then go downstairs because I feel cool air coming from the basement, the stairs down to the basement. And if you walk down there, it was 20 degrees cooler because it was a natural fucking limestone cave with water dripping, and the smell of mildew would make your eyes water. So after the show, when I got home, I called Kevin. I said, Kevin, don't recommend any promoters to me anymore. I can't take it. My allergies won't put up with it. I just got sidetracked telling that story, didn't I?
No, but it's good. I mean, these are the kind of stories we want to get on here. Not just the ones people know, but...
Not just the ones people want to hear, but the ones they need to hear.
Let me play you some audio because I'd like to get your impression, because this is a period of time where I think you were still on the booking committee, and it's maybe the longest bleep in terms of wrestling ever on TBS. Kevin Sullivan with Buzz Sawyer and Cactus Jack. Let me go to this.
Kevin, this guy's got to have a little help.
He got a lot of help. He's got me. Let me tell you something. It ain't the dog's fault. When his mother was carrying him and she's walking through the desert because she was a nomad, she couldn't hold it any longer. She stopped. And left him there to die. Well, the dog didn't die.
By the way, while this is happening, he has Buzz Sawyer, who's on the ground, a chain around his neck, and Kevin's just holding it there while he's choking himself, Buzz Sawyer.
Yes, Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer, big log and chain around his neck. Cactus Jack, who's from Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, and obviously deranged. And in Kevin Sullivan talking about JYD's mother, who was a Nubian. And as I remember it from the taping, there was something about squatting down and fucking delivering the infant right there where...
You can read his lips, something about squatting and the cord, and Mick Foley, Cactus Jack is
that's right, and she chewed the cord.
And Mick Foley's the most normal person involved in this whole thing, but let's go back to this.
Because from the fetal position, he crawled the heart-burning sands. It's me. He crawled the heart-burning sands. It's me. It's me. God. It's me. He crawled the heart-burning sands. And when he was burning up and withering, the she-wolf came. And the mad dog looked up, and he was given the breath of life. It's not the dog's fault. He's just a part of the environment. He'll be okay. You see, because the dog has me. The dog finally, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. The dog has me. The dog has finally found peace in his life. You see, all he is misunderstood.
Fans, we'll be back right after this.
Did I say JYD?
You said JYD.
I said Mad Dog, whatever the fuck. But yes, it also with that one was didn't the she-wolf kiss the dogs and give him the breath of the, I don't know what the fuck.
I have to go back and read his lips
was
there, yeah. But he's smacking Buzz Sawyer as hard as he can right in the fucking
Yeah, that's
face.
what he kept, when he kept stopping that one sentence, he's just slapping the shit out of his, because Buzz loved that kind of shit anyway. Yeah, hit me. And he's slapping the shit out of him like he's, training a goddamn wild horse.
What do you think of him and Dusty together? You got to see them behind the scenes, so what do you think of their feud and their long-running thing in Florida, and then, of course, for Crockett? But behind the scenes, what was the relationship like?
Well, they worked great together because they had known each other so long, and they'd been, by the time that I was together with them, they had been, they'd drawn so much money with each other and been such great opponents. And that whole thing ran for 2 years in Florida till Dusty came to the Carolinas. And then Kevin, as you said earlier, took over the book down there when Dusty got the book for Crockett. But that's it. Kevin, as a performer, he knew what he needed to do, and he was also with the guys in his group. He wanted to flesh that out. He wasn't going to overstep his bounds, but if Dusty came to him, Dusty knew that Kevin can either give good ideas or help flesh it out or understand what Dusty is looking for, because they've worked together for so long. So that's the thing, is that, Dusty loved having Kevin working there on the card because he didn't have to fucking micromanage him. He could just give him shit and let him run with it, and he could make something out of it.
Kevin and JJ Dillon got along really great too.
Well, yes, and same thing. They'd both been in the business for a long period of time in a variety of roles, and were not assholes or power mad, social climbers, and understood how to do their thing. And it was easy to work with both of them.
What's the secret to the stomp that Kevin used to do where he would stomp on the guy's belly?
Well, I would say the same thing with Finn Balor. I've had people say, oh no, they say you don't feel it. I don't know how. With Kevin, there wasn't as much of a secret, as much as, at least he wasn't getting that much height. He wasn't getting that much air.
He made it work, though. You know what? And again, his earliest wrestling photos, they said probably to help him that he was 5'11". I think legitimately he was 5'7". And he made his size work with the style he worked in the ring.
Yes, as a babyface, he was powerful because, like I said, in the younger years, he was a power lifter, stocky body type, and had a lot of weight and a lot of strength. People could see it, even though he was vertically challenged. But then as a heel, because he was constant motion, and he was aggressive, and he had that level of crazy by that point, and that's why he was close with the Sheik, because he understood what the Sheik did to be special and unique. And that, that kind of thing works when you're a heel and you're crazy. And but he could make it work with the sense of danger and urgency instead of just the walk fighting around. So even though he, again, wasn't that tall, he was always in Memphis, when he had been doing the bodybuilding, he wasn't that tall, but he was goddamn shredded. And it actually made him look taller. And then in the other eras, he wasn't that tall, but he was 250 fucking pounds or whatever. And you could tell that he had some oomph to him. And like you said, the style he worked, as a younger baby face, he could still sell, he could still bleed, make a comeback or whatever. But as a heel, he really fell into that pattern of just trying to be dangerous instead of going for arm drags. But then as you said earlier, though, you didn't see the goddamn fight in the arena 4 matches out of 7.
Right. It was unique. He was one of the few guys that you knew you would get a wild match out of.
And also, and when Smoky Mountain, the next year, I think it was the next year after the Stomper, he had the fucking arena fight with the big boss man, Bubba. Came back and did it 1 year later. I've got pictures of them up in the balcony. I think that was whenever the fuck.
I think that was 93
no,
also.
No, that was 93 because it was the same week. He just did it with Stomper in fucking one town and Bubba in the other town. But nevertheless, where was I going with that?
The wild matches, and that you didn't see them all over the card back then.
You didn't see them all over the card back then. And also, the fact that Kevin could make you believe that there was something going on with him mentally and that he was way too into this to just be playing a part. So there was some element of legitimacy to it. That helped him do things that it would be bullshit if other people did them because you could see through them. And he could go farther over we talked about Stone Cold Steve Austin stomping a mud hole in somebody. But he was over like God, so he could not even connect, and the people didn't care. They didn't see it. They overlooked it. Didn't compute. Kevin in Florida had that reputation to the point where and now some asshole on an outlaw show is going to do this. It's going to fall like a fart in church. But the thing that Kevin did with Blackjack Mulligan, and the people believed in Blackjack too. All the rednecks and the country people down in Florida, the redneck Riviera over there in Pensacola, whatever. They were at the Orlando Eddie Graham Sports Stadium, which was a big tin building. It seated like 5,000 people out in the middle of a fucking field. And they made a fortune there for years. And Kevin and Blackjack, they had double DQ. They spill out of the fucking ring. They fight out the back door, out into the parking lot, and off into the darkness. They didn't even have fucking lights out there. They're gone. The people are running. Where the fuck they go? And then the next goddamn week, on the same night, they have wrestling once a week. They ring the bell for the first match. The first match gets going. They've been going about 5 minutes, and suddenly through the front door of the arena, wearing the same shit that they had been wearing the week before and still bleeding, bust Kevin Sullivan and Blackjack Mulligan, and they fight into the fucking ring, and the place goes out of their fucking minds. They didn't stop to think, how could this be? They just, oh my God. That's the kind of shit he could get away with. That's one of the great spots I've ever heard of all time.
I got to talk a lot of baseball with him. That was one of his big loves, was baseball. When the 86 Mets beat the Red Sox in the World Series, he was working in Continental. He had to watch it backstage, he said. A heartbreaking loss for him, but a few years ago, I'm looking at some of the text messages here. I wished him a happy birthday in October. And he wrote back, "Fuck LA and Mookie. Although he's going to be a Hall of Famer, he better go in as a Red Sox." So, love this baseball, Kevin.
Did you see Fenway Park put him up on the screen, the scoreboard?
That would have meant the world to him. And, yeah, again, from my experience, and I met him when I was a kid, and that was an intimidating thing, even though it wasn't really supposed to be. It was just an autograph signing, but that accent, nothing he could say when you're a kid sounded nice. I was wearing a Knicks shirt. He's like, "How do you think the Knicks are going to do?" I'm like, I think they're going to win. Who do you think is going to win? No, it's going to be Chicago. Whatever. He yelled it at me. But, getting to know him the last several years, he was such a nice guy. Like I said, always very giving with his time. He recorded a ton of segments with me. And he always just gave me unsolicited feedback, which from Kevin Sullivan I liked. I like when top minds give me feedback as opposed to, jerk-offs.
Yeah, the unsolicited part is sometimes the rub, but with Kevin, you didn't mind.
But with Kevin, I appreciated where it was coming from. So from my personal experience, just a tremendous guy, a really nice guy, and I wish he was still here. A really, really nice guy.
Well, everybody heard what I had to say about how he helped me in WCW, not only my first booking spot, but in Smoky Mountain, in trying to help because he knew what I was going through and what I owed to him for that. I'm not going to go through it again because then I'd just be repeating myself and rambling. But a lot of people will remember him for a lot of good things. And who else can you think of? 54 years after they started in the business, their passing makes the kind of news his did, not only in a mainstream level, but also amongst the fans and the boys.
Made the New York Times.
Made the New York Times and a scoreboard in Fenway Park. And, for that long, I mean, he was literally still working in the business as far as autographs and etc., and had wrestled up until just a few years ago on an intermittent basis. So I don't know. There's a lot of people, whatever era it may be, a lot of people have never come close to that level of involvement or longevity in this business. And I think we should all be proud of him for that.
Absolutely. And of course, if you're a listener who wants to hear Kevin in his own words, go back through the archives. We've had many appearances with Kevin, of course, here with Jim on the 605 Super Podcast, telling his own story in his own words. But Jim, with that, let's take a short time out. We'll be right back after this.